everybody. What a wonderful crowd. So how many are coming to the Historical Society's programs for the very first time? Look at you. John, you don't count. We invited you. Okay, yeah. And so how did you hear about it? Wonderful. Thank you, Geology Club, for your contributions. We do have several people from the Geology Club today, so welcome. Boy, where to start? We've got so excited about our program today. We do need to remind people that we do have a membership, and membership dues end as of December 31st. Pat's got lots of envelopes back there as a reminder. We'll probably send them out with the newsletter in January. If you don't get the newsletter because you're not a member, that's a really good reason to get it. This is now how we announce our programs and tell you what kinds of projects we have going on. Our board members, we're always very proud to have them attend. We have some new board members. Betsy Denny, she comes to us from the west side of the county. Marianne Harper. Marianne, oh, you're right here in front of me. So nice to have you. And I don't know that we had introduced Dale Booty. He's been on the board a little bit longer, but Dale's one of our newer members too. So thank you, Dale. We have 2 vacancies on our board. So if anybody's interested in helping us plan programs and work on projects and just have an overall good time with Fremont County's history, let us know. We would love to have you. We meet here in this facility at 1 o'clock on the second Monday of each month. So, and you're always welcome to come to a board meeting, even if you aren't a board member. They're certainly open. So, without further ado, we're very excited to have John Wesley Anderson as our guest speaker today in our program. He is got quite the background. He's a published author, storyteller, and does TEDx speaking. He was a law enforcement officer with the police department in Colorado Springs for 30 years, retiring as sergeant after 22 years, followed by 8 years serving as an elected sheriff for El Paso County. After being term limited as sheriff, he retired from public safety, worked on Homeland Security for 10 years. I'm not sure you're old enough to have gained all of these. I added these years up, John, yeah. So John has traveled around the world, including several adventures on a catamaran sailing in the Caribbean. He remains most fascinated by the rich history and art discovered in his own backyard, and that's the American Southwest. John has his books that are for sale in the very, very back, and the other table of books is our Historical Society's Heritage Guides. But John, we welcome you.
Well, thank you.
And we're very excited to hear about what you're speaking today about the prayer trees of Native America.
What a kind introduction. Well, I've been so looking forward to coming here. I love Fremont County, Cañon City. We lived here when I was growing up for 3 years, so a lot of fond memories here. And then from here, we moved to a small ranch south of Calhan, Ellicott area. And then that's where I graduated high school. And then my mother, after we sold the ranch, moved back here. And at one time, I had 4 of my sisters living here in Cañon City and researching some of my books. It was always fun to talk to them about, well, okay, 2 of my sisters live south of the Arkansas River and 2 on the north side. And so during my research, I said, oh, you would have been a French citizen during this year, and you would have been a Mexican citizen, and then all of you would have been a Spanish citizen during this time. So it was kind of fun to share that with them. I'm thrilled not only to be back with the Fremont County Historical Society, giving this talk on the Native American prayer trees. How many of you were familiar with the prayer trees before you saw announcement. Mark definitely was. I think he grew up with that. We'll talk about you and your parents a little bit more here in a few minutes. I'm sharing one of the videos that your dad produced. And I have to confess, growing up on a ranch where I was in the Eastern Plains, we'd occasionally find, like an arrowhead. Usually they were broken, or a piece of a tool, or, just some shirt that was chipped off. But I've always had a fascination with Native American artifacts, but I had no idea that they modified trees. That was a new subject to me, and it wasn't until the 1980s I'd read an article in the newspaper in Colorado Springs about the Ute Indian prayer trees. And I thought, that's kind of interesting, and I'd cut that newspaper clipping out, and something that my mother always did when she was around. She kept, on all 6 of us kids, she kept baby books and things all her life on all of us. And so I filed that away, and I thought, well, someday I want to come back to that subject. And that led to my first book on the Ute Indian prayer trees that I published in 2015. And one of the things that I made the mistake of doing was sending the book and the photos and the early draft to Mark's dad, Don, and his dad, Don Wells, and Diane, his mother, Diane, had published a book on the Cherokee trail marker trees and the mysteries of the trees. And so I sent that to Don, and I was so fascinated that he took time, to review it, and then he called, or we communicated by email. I can't remember what we did. But I remember his comments. And he said, John, this is really kind of a fascinating subject you have here. I've looked at your photos. They're beautiful. This is going to be a great book. And you've quoted, a number of people who have interviewed some of the Ute elders about these trees. But he said, I don't see where you've interviewed, unless I missed, I don't see where you've interviewed any of the native elders, Indian Ute people about these trees. And I said, well, Don, I don't even know where to begin. I don't know any Ute people. How would I possibly, go interview any of them? He said, well, John, you asked my opinion, and it's this. You and your book will have much more credibility if you put this project kind of on the back burner, go to the reservation. He said, you're going to have to go more than once because you're not Native American, and they're not going to trust you. So that's scratch 1. Scratch 2 is you're a former politician, and I just carry that with me everywhere I go. And then 3 is, you're going to have to disclose, well, I'm writing a book. May I quote you? And he said, that's going to be a really hard challenge. And he said, prepare yourself. You can't go just once. You're going to have to go several times. If you take my advice, you'll try to get a Ute elder involved in your project. And what a life-changing thing that was. And the elder that I was just so fortunate to meet was Dr. James Jefferson, and I'll show a photograph of him here in a moment. How many of you have been down to the Ute reservations in the Four Corners area? Wonderful trip, isn't it? It's just a neat experience and get to know them. Point being, what I thought was a book in a journey about a thing, about a tree that was modified, what I soon realized is the story isn't about the tree, it's about the people behind the trees. And that's what I want to communicate with you today. I'm here to tell you a story of the people, predominantly the Ute people, although there's some other tribes we'll talk about, who modified these Native American prayer trees that we can still find here throughout Colorado. A couple of them are on Mark's property, so if you treat him right and talk to him, who knows, but I'm ahead of my side, yeah. I'm also thrilled that there are so many people from the Geology Society. How many members of the Geology Society? And when you introduced yourself, I thought, I have got to make sure that when I get to my second to the last slide and talk about the medicine wheel, that's going to be fascinating, because what we found is a lot of times these sacred trees, well, not a lot of times, almost always, there's a story, or the more common ones are the trail marker trees. And a lot of times they're pointing towards a trail or a resource. It could be a flint mine. It could be, a number of different resources. But they always point deliberately at something. And oftentimes when you'll find a trail marker tree, it points to a trail marker, points to a trail marker. And then sometimes you'll get into where there's a covey of, different types of trees. And we'll visit about some of the different ones. This is a burial tree on northern El Paso County that I selected for the cover of the book. And what you'll find is this covey of trees, different types of trees, are often associated with either a teepee ring or a fire pit or a petroglyph or some rock feature. A medicine wheel, we found one really spectacular medicine wheel in Jefferson County west of Littleton, Colorado. And what you'll find is that there's an association between the stone features and the prayer trees. And the nice thing here in Colorado with the prayer trees is they have such, particularly the ponderosa pine or the bristle cone up at higher elevations, they have such a long lifespan. The ponderosa pine can live between 600 and 800 years. So while there were other Native American modified trees, like the trail marker trees that Don and Diane studied back in Georgia, along the trail at Tears and other areas, many of those trees are the lower trees at lower elevations, a lot of them that are growing along creeks or rivers, like the cottonwoods, and they don't have the longevity that some of the trees that we have in Colorado are. The second thing of importance is the Ute people, who were the indigenous people of Colorado. They were the last tribe in North America or Canada who were forced onto an Indian reservation, and that was in 1880, pursuant to the Ute Agreement. The Ute Agreement was nothing that they agreed to in 1880, but it followed the 1879 Meeker Massacre, and that's the document, the Ute Agreement, that forced all the Ute to relocate either to the Southern Ute Reservation in the Four Corners area, or they were escorted, most of them, into Utah, into Fort Duchesne for the Northern Reservation. So what I thought we would do, just to kind of orientate everybody, is we'd go about 45 minutes, and then we'll do some Q&A, if that sounds good to everybody. That's always my favorite part of the talk, because that's where I learn something, is during the Q&A session. So are we ready to go? I have a couple of thank yous that I must do before I flip over my first slide. First one is to Kathy. Where's Kathy? There you are, and we go way back. She's visited the reservation with our two of her sisters, and I just so thank you, Kathy, for the invitation to be here. I know we talked about this for forever, so thank you. And let's see, Dan, thank you for the excellent AV work. It was nice to get your emails and know that I'd be in good hands. It's always terrifying as a speaker, to show up in a strange place and you wonder, well, my slide's going to work, and because this is one of those programs you have to have, slides. Otherwise, there's just not going to be any fun at all. And Gloria, thank you, Gloria, wherever you went, for that wonderful introduction. I'm thrilled to be here, and thanks to all of you that helped behind the scenes make this possible. And thanks to all of you for being here too. If it's okay, I'm going to jettison this coat, just because I think it's just a little warm in here. And I was telling Fred, when I got up in Woodland Park this morning, it was 12 degrees. When we pulled up in front, it was 51. So we're all very fortunate here. Let me go to my first slide and kind of orientate you, for some of you that are not familiar with these Native American culturally modified trees. That's the overarching theme. You could find these all over Colorado. The one on the left is on Rabbit Ears Pass. Oftentimes, you'll find that the trees are aligned with a pass or a trail or a water crossing, and they were used extensively for navigational purposes. This one on the right is in northern El Paso County, and we were fortunate that the developer who was putting in this large development north of Baptist Road, north of the Fox Run Regional Park. If for those, how many have been to Fox Run besides Kathy? Oh, yeah, wonderful place to view the prayer trees. Double-digit prayer trees there. They're just everywhere in Fox Run. Probably the greatest concentration and variety of existing prayer trees anywhere. It's just an hour north off of Baptist Road and I-25. But the developer, after we talked to him about the importance of these trees, he didn't cut this one down. He cut all the others around that for development, and we don't think any of those were Native American trees, with the exception of one. One was a prayer tree, but had been standing dead for some time. So with his permission and the consent of one of the Ute elders, we were able to date that tree through dendrochronology and tree ring dating, and I'll share that result with you here in a few minutes. The trees, the Native American culturally modified trees, were modified by different tribes, and you'll find them across the U.S. and Canada. Don and Diane Wells started a nonprofit, the Georgia Mountain Stewards, and they keep a database. And I think the last time I talked to Diane, they had in the database, it was over 2,000 trees documented, and I think 44 of the 48 contiguous states. So they're very prolific once you know what to look for. And and it's easy to start training your mind what to look for because you're looking for something that's not natural. Trees, they'll want to grow straight, seeking sunlight. The scientific term is heliotropic, meaning sun-seeking. And unless something or someone intervenes, that tree pretty much is going to go straight. And a tree, I did not know this 20 years ago. A tree grows from the top up, kind of like a corn stalk. It grows from the top up, or plants. I just thought, that it just grew out of the ground, kind of like a Jack and the Beanstalk kind of a moment, when they start growing. But the proof, is all around us. If you, are looking at a tree and at eye level, and this I guess would be more for the guys. If you took out your pocket knife, and none of us carry pocket knives anymore, but if you did, or back in the day, and you carved your initials plus, and your high school girlfriend, and drew an arrow, a heart around it, and you came back in 50 years, that heart and those initials aren't 50 feet up the tree. They're right there where you put your initials, right at eye level, because the tree grows from the top up. So the importance is when there's a modification to the tree, and we'll explore that in a couple of them here in a moment, that's the height that the tree was at when the modification occurred, because all the growth occurs above that. So we'll talk about that more here in a moment. The one on the left at Rabbit Ears Pass is significant. It's probably a burial tree, and we can tell that because of the two 90-degree bends. In the Ute, anyway, their traditions, what they teach, is that we all come from Mother Earth physically. We all walk across the earth in life, and at the end of life, we all ascend to Creator. Those are absolutes in their mind. Do we have anybody who's Native American here in the audience? Nobody here is Native American? I'm not either, so I can't explain this fascination or obsession with these trees. I just find this subject really just terribly intriguing. But what the Ute believe, and this is true with almost every tribe or Native person I've talked to anywhere, is that we all will ascend to Creator, and that there is an afterlife, and we will live in the afterlife. And this is one of the fascinating things for me, and it's interesting we'll be having this discussion here in this church. You may have picked up on this. I'm a John Wesley, so I was raised by a very dominant Methodist mother who insisted on all 6 of his kids have that open heart, open mind, open door, kind of a mentality growing up. So it's easier for me, I think, to accept other cultures different than my own than maybe some people. But the Native American people that I've interviewed for my books, and it's in the dozens, without exception, not a one struggles with what a lot of Christian people, struggle with all their lives. Is there a God? Is there a heaven? Is there a hell? Without exception, the Native American people that I've had a discussion with on the spiritual side is if you say, well, do you think there is a Creator? And they kind of look at you like you're, kind of goofy, like you got 3 eyes. And it's, well, of course, what a strange question to ask. Because that's not a question. It's an absolute imperative with the Native American people that I've talked to. And that's one of the unique things about the Native American culture that's different so much than our European or traditional Christian. Another is that absolute belief that everything that's shaped by the hands of Creator has a spirit. Well, again, growing up in that traditional kind of a Christian view, that's different than what I learned in Sunday school. And so when some of the elders tried to share with me that, well, no, if you look in the eyes of a horse, or a dog, or a cat, and having dogs and cats, and growing up on a ranch and having horses, when you look in their eyes, and some of you may have had that experience. If you look in the eyes of an animal, sometimes you can see that spirit, behind that eye. It's not just biological. There is something there that's pretty extraordinary. There's something behind that. And so I think I could accept when this was about 20 years ago, when some of the Native American people were saying, if you encounter a bear or an eagle or a fox, they too have a spirit, and they will live in the afterlife. And I thought, well, that's really fascinating. And I think I could, begin to accept that. But when they said, well, a tree, is made by the hands of Creator, as is a rose, or is a butterfly, or a ladybug, they believe, almost without exception, that all of those things, to include a tree, is going to have a spirit. And it took a little bit of while for me to adjust to that, and I won't try to reprogram you. I'm just trying to say there's a culture that may be different than what that I was exposed to growing up, that's worth kind of thinking about. So the thought process with the prayer trees is that tree is a living, spiritual, sentient being, and it will live in the afterlife. And that begins to change your entire paradigm about studying the trees and the people behind the trees. One of those traditions, at least this is exclusive with the tribes that I've talked to, is that the modification of the tree had to be done in prayer with the consent of the tree and creator. And so if the tree does get modified, such as these two, the tree agreed with the modification and the creator blessed that modification. And the prayers that were associated at the very beginning, the very first modification, those prayers are still resident in the tree. And when the Native American people, again predominantly the Ute, they returned to that tree, they would pray around the tree. They'd pray for the health of the tree, the health of the tribe, the health of the animals, the area, the sacredness of the area. They'd pray about the rocks. And whenever they contributed another prayer, then the tree accepts that prayer and the next prayer and the next prayer, and it keeps those prayers. And that's kind of a fascinating thought. So if we think of how many prayers were said in this room right next to us, what it means is that every prayer that was ever said here in the sanctuary is still here. Every one from every Sunday, communicative, and that's what they believe is around the prayers. The longer the tree lives, the more powerful it is because it has many more prayers. And it's much like the Tibetan prayer flags that some of you may have studied and maybe have seen. Anybody study the Tibetan prayer flag? It's real similar that the prayer is in the flag, and when the wind blows, the flag releases the prayers into the wind. But the prayers are still in. I mean, it's not a one time and gone. They're still there. So the next day when the wind blows, and what at least the Ute believe is that the tree, when it accepts the prayers, will carry those prayers to the very top of the tree. And when the wind blows and the pine needles jiggle, that it releases those prayers. And that those prayers are carried by the wind across the land for up to 800 years, the lifespan of that tree. Isn't that a beautiful thought? If it's true, I think it's really magnificent. And there's really something to be said about standing in the forest or sitting down or even laying down on your back and looking up, at the pine needles jiggle when the wind blows. I think having been a former politician, I have to have moments like that to kind of, recover from where I've been. The other tradition that is similar is the bonsai tree. Anybody in here bonsai masters, bonsai? Oh, okay. Yeah. And I'm not either, but I have met some, and I've given this lecture with the Rocky Mountain Bonsai Society. I have to make sure I pronounce it right, not bonsai, like I've pronounced all my life. It's bonsai, like bone-like structure, in the Colorado-Wyoming chapters. So I've met several bonsai masters, and I've actually been able to go with them into Fox Run Regional Park where we study the trees. And the traditions that the bonsai masters apply today are almost exactly the same as we experienced with these prayer trees, with one exception. They did not have access, they being the Native American people, to wire or metal. So they used other, like yucca cordage or some natural fiber, maybe leather to modify the tree. So the trees are, in my view, a living Native American cultural artifact. Some of these are 550, 600, 650 years old. Now think about that. That's an opportunity to walk up and touch a living pre-Columbian Native American cultural artifact. Now, how many times are you going to get to do that in your life? And in the Black Forest area, Kevin, there are a number, I would say at least a half dozen, that we believe are pre-Columbian. This one may have been pre-Columbian. We lost it 2 years ago. And it's kind of like our tree in Beulah that we lost with the heavy spring snowstorm about 3 years ago. Has anybody seen that one at the base of Tower Trail? We were talking about that one in Beulah. When it went down, I got calls from some of the friends down there. Jim Campbell was one of the retired ministers from there. And I remember his call. He said, John, you probably heard by now, we lost the prayer tree there on Tower Road. And he said, it's really kind of shaken the Beulah community because it was such an important and a historic part. And it was, I'd say it was probably as big around as this one here. It was a huge tree, probably 350, 400, 450 years old. And his quote was, John, I did not know that you could mourn the loss of a tree, but clearly you can. Isn't that really touching? And this artifact here is one I found on our ranch south of the paint mines. The difference is between these two Native American artifacts, I have no idea how old the one on the left is. It could be a couple hundred years old. It might be a couple thousand. It's not a Clovis point or it's not a Folsom point, so it's not 9 or 10 or 12,000 years old. But the nice thing about the trees is you can get an idea, generally speaking, about how old that tree is. Again, depends on the species. Since we know that the ponderosas can live to be 600 to 800 years old, they reach a half-life of between 300 and 400 years old, and they start taking on this beautiful orangish color on the bark. And when that occurs, for the most part, the tree has reached its terminal height. The terminal height that it's going to grow. Now we'll keep adding a tree ring each year, so the girth, it'll keep getting broader, but it's just not going to grow any higher. And you know, about 50 years ago, the same thing happened to me. Anyway, let's go on. This is Dr. Jefferson here on the left, and this was his 88th birthday. He loves Mexican food, and so we were in La Junta studying the photo you see in the middle for the geology people in here, a stone circle in near the picket wire area on a private ranch. That stone circles in the taller one in the back has been stood upright, and then the one in the front, and this is a large circle of stone. The one in the back, it was a flat rock that had been stood up and it had been notched. So it looks like the rear sight on a rifle and the front sight on the rifle. And when we were there the first time, we took compass measurements, and we said, you know, we think that this aligns with the sunrise on the equinox of both the spring and the fall equinox, because they're going to be the same. And a local rancher, cowboy, that had led us to the site, he said, there's only one way to know. He said, you're going to need to be there at sunrise. And so Dr. Jefferson was game. We brought him up from the reservation. And so this was the night before when we were at this Mexican restaurant, and the wait staff was so fun. They knew it was his 88th birthday, and they brought out that big sombrero and something, you know, that was had a candle in it and sang in Spanish, happy birthday to him. So he was thrilled with that. On the right is a prayer tree that is on the U.S. Air Force Academy. Anybody affiliated with the Air Force Academy or grew up in that area? This is near on Stadium Boulevard, just north of the football stadium, near the family camping area. Fam Camp is what it's known as. And that's a magnificent tree. It's also one of my top 10. And the portion of the trunk that's been separated, bifurcated, is because that's one solid trunk. So it's growing out of the ground. It was bent when it was very young. They have to be young because these ponderosas, after about 18, 20 years, the trunk gets so stiff you couldn't bend them close. You could bend them up higher, but not close to the ground. So when it was first growing, it was selected and was bent. And normally how they would do that is tie a cordage around the tree to a wooden stake in the ground, and then as the tree grows, then it readjusts its growth to be sun-seeking again. So this tree was oriented in this direction. It was very, very small. And then as it's growing, somebody came along and separated that trunk, because this is one common trunk. I don't know how well you can see it in the back. We did keep, Dan and I, a copy of the slides here, and then there's also copies that are available. I never copyright my slides, so you're welcome to have them if you like maps, I'm going to show you a fascinating map here in a minute. That's high res, so if you're interested in maps, you can get them off the slides I'm leaving behind. But this one, we believe, may be attributed to the Ute for this reason. Out of all of in Colorado and northern New Mexico, out of all of the 14,000 foot peaks that the Ute knew as the Shining Mountains, well, the mountain we know as Pikes Peak is one of their most sacred mountains. They knew that mountain as Tava, T-A-V-A. In the Ute language, the pronunciation is on the second syllable, so it's Tava is how it would be properly pronounced. Dr. Jefferson's PhD is in linguistics, and he's had a hard time trying to teach me the language. The Ute language is really a challenging language, almost as hard as the Cherokee language, and I know about 3 words in each, so I'm not much help. But the point being is we think we can attribute that modified tree to the Ute people with a high degree of certainty because of the orientation it has towards Tava, the sacred mountain. When I published the first book back here, Ute Indian Prairie Trees of Pikes Peak region, these 2 trail marker trees were in that book. I really didn't know much about the other Native American tribes that were here that also modified trees. And I had no intention of publishing a second book. But what happens with so many of these subjects, and Kevin can relate to this, the more you learn, and once you get that first book out, people come up and say, well, did you know about the Cherokee being here? Did you know there was a Cherokee Trail that connected the Santa Fe Trail and the California-Oregon Trail, and from Bent's Fort to Fort Bridger, the Cherokee ran right through the Black Forest and there's trail marker trees along the remnants of that Cherokee Trail. And I had no idea. And then we also, I'll come back to that thought with the Cherokee here in a minute. The trail marker tree on the left is in Eagle County. In the background, you can see I-70. So we've just come over Vail Pass. We're going west. I-70's in the background. And East Vail, all of you have probably driven over that. At the base is this magnificent trail marker tree, and it's pointing to Gore Creek. Gore Creek, if you follow it to the headwaters, which is up here several miles, is at the base of Gore Pass. And then if you cross over Gore Pass, if you were doing this in the 1860s, 1870s, you would arrive on the Ute White River Indian Reservation, near where the town of Meeker sits today, which was named after Nathan Meeker with the Meeker Massacre. So there's, we believe, an orientation, a connection to the Ute people because of the geographical area around it. This tree has a nice peel bark here, and the traditional peel that you'll find on many of those trunks is kind of a long, elongated teardrop, where at the top there's almost always a sharp split, and then then it elongates as it goes down the trunk of the tree. You can often see a gouge mark where they were prying off the outer bark, and then at the bottom a tear. So that pattern that we call a cut gouge tear, cut gouge tear, cut gouge tear, you won't see it on all of your trees, but when you do, it helps identify human modification. I should have mentioned that these trail marker trees, one of the common orientations with them is one bend of the trunk at about a 30-degree angle of orientation. The tree on the right is in Fox Run Regional Park. If you park off a roller coaster road and you take that trailhead to the right and you're going kind of counterclockwise, that one is one of the first trees that you'll come across, and it is magnificent. About 10 or 12 feet off the ground, it looks like a dead branch sticking up, and you may have noticed that here. It looks like a dead branch. That's actually part of the original trunk. And why that's important to study is sometimes, not always, but you'll find that primary trunk's been girdled. That's a forester term, and girdling is when the bark has been stripped all the way off of that trunk. And if you don't have the bark, you can't carry the cambium that is the nutrients for the rest of the tree's growth. So it's purposely redirecting the natural growth, the sun-seeking growth of that tree upward. So this one has evidence of human modification by the girdling effect around that primary. So when you can find that, that's probably the strongest evidence, according to many of the foresters that we've talked to, that it's been human modified. And again, that height is fixed, so that's the height that they were working at. Not all of the trees are going to be girdled. This one is not. It extends way out here, and then it withered and died just on its own. It could no longer sustain the common, the continual growth upward. But it's just like the road signs we have today. You know, it's marking a resource or telling us something, you know, that there's a crossing here. This is where you can hunt, you can find resources, plants for growth. And one of the things that I've heard, actually, I'm sorry, let me go back to this one just for a second. One of the criticisms I heard about trail marker trees, which was kind of nonsensical, it was coming from a Native American person, so I listened intently. They said, my people didn't need trail marker trees. They knew this land like the back of their hand, which is true. And when he told Dr. Jefferson he didn't believe these were trail marker trees, Dr. Jefferson said, well, you don't understand. This wasn't done, you know, for the people that did the tree. This is done for the next generation and the next generation to follow. And that's an important part of the Native American traditions. A lot of times they're not making a decision or a modification of a tree or a stone feature for themselves. They're doing it for the next generation, the next generation. And in many of the tribes, they look with some reverence to the seventh generation. And what they talk about is if you make all your decisions in what's in the best interest of the seventh generation from now, you're probably making the right decision. Because people won't know you, you know, your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, everybody who knew you is gone. So if you're making your decisions based upon what's in the best interest of the seventh generation, and the seventh generation of Native American people have now been born. So it's exciting to be able to share some of these trees with that generation, the seventh generation. Now let me go to this slide I've been wanting to show. This one appears in my first prayer tree book, and as far as I know, it's never been published, and until it came out in my book. The teepee lodge poles are orientated about a 30-degree angle of inclination. I don't think that's an accident. I think that they realize that that's the angle, you know, that can sustain, you know, the forces of nature, you know, the best. There's reasons for that geometric angle and that look. We think some of the trees probably did have a purpose for one of the lodge poles. We think some of the teepees, you know, were arranged around that. So if you're looking for a teepee ring or a fire pit or some stone feature, you know, it's good to look around those trees as well. These two Native American people, women, fascinated me when I first came across this photograph. It was in the collection at the Colorado College Special Collection. And when you look into their eyes, you know, and the nice thing about the books as well as the images, you can blow them up on your computer. And I think it's a fascinating thought. Is this the one and only time that these people were ever photographed in their life? Is this the only thing that remains that proves of their existence, this photograph? Well, in many cases, that's what we find in the trees, that it's evidence of their being there, right there at that tree. And it's one of the differences, you know, with a stone tool or a mono or, you know, a tomahawk head. I have a tomahawk head in my collection. Is that's easily, it's portable. You can pick it up and you can take it somewhere. The trees are not. So that's the exact place where those people stood, where their prayers were first uttered. We're very confident that these two women are Ute and that this is a Ute teepee because of the beadwork on the horses. This is probably a saddlebag or a tote bag that we're looking at here. That's a traditional Ute pattern on that bag. And that photograph was snapped, I think it's in the 1870s or 1880s in northern Colorado, northeastern Colorado. Now, we tried to get this video to run off of here, and it's just not going to. Is that going to run, Dan?
Ute people came from the mountains. We're mountain people. And for years I've been taking kids out, traveling getting them off the reservation. So, because I want them to learn so they could know their ancestral land. That's real important to me. And I've cried a river, no, I've cried an ocean over it, because we visit these places and they're beautiful. The mountain areas, just beautiful. And I always tell them, you come from a strong group of people. Your ancestors were so strong because they lived in the mountains. I think, wow, my ancestors walked on the same trail and I'm here. And it really touches my soul. Well, I think most of the trees that have been found in these areas, they're all pointing to Pikes Peak. They're not just trail markers, but they're places is to where you could have an offering, present your offering. And in our case, we bring tobacco as an offering, which is a sacred plant. And so they would offer the tobacco, and we've been told that we need to approach it from the west. And then we have our offering. And so I've had little kids lined up to give their offering. So we believe that everything is living. And so when I come to the tree, that's my prayer being offered, but it becomes part of that tree. My soul, my feeling, my emotions that I'm feeling is given. There were 3 markings on this particular tree, and we call it the Holy Woman tree. What they would do is bend the tree, and this would be the altar. Speaking to the tree, you say you're gonna offer tobacco. And the offering goes, the prayer is to Creator, is where ultimately the prayer goes. And then you have speaking to the ancestors, because that's the important part of my travels in the different areas that I travel where our ancestors were. And what I want to say when I'm praying is tell the ancestors that we care and love them. And I'm here to be with their spirit, because we know they're around, they're here. And then to the spirit of the tree, the prayer tree, because the prayer tree is holding the prayers. And so then it goes to Creator. So I never want to say anything that's untruth. I want to be as honest, whatever ancestors want me to give, to share about, what happened long ago and why we do things, it's going to come from them. A long time ago, they didn't have refrigerators, so to save the berries, they would just spread them out on the... My ancestors need a voice, and I feel like that I have been, one of the chosen people to speak the truth of our ancestors. And I want to know more. I want to know the songs. I want to know the dances. I want to know the ceremonies. So it's like I'm just barely at the tip of the iceberg now.
I never got to meet Loya Aram. In the Ute tradition, they don't say you died, they say you walked on. And about 3 months after Mark's dad, Don, videotaped Loya Aram, she walked on. But fortunately, thanks to Don and Diane Wells, they left behind this legacy of Loya Aram. And I think it really makes you realize the importance to her and her family and many of the Ute families, what these trees are like. Let me go back to the slide presentation. I wanted to insert that there for two one important reason, one not so important. The important one is so that you'd hear from an actual Ute person, an elder. And the not so important reason is it gave me an opportunity to sneak to the back, and there was an eclair back here that was calling me. I don't know if you all heard it or not, but it gave me a 2-minute break or 4-minute break to go find that. So I mentioned the Comanche, and this book didn't get published released until 2017. My first prayer tree book came out in 2015. And what's important about this book, The Comanche Marker Trees of Texas, is that was written by a professional forester, Steve Hauser, career PhD anthropologist, Linda Palin, and at the time, the cultural preservation officer of the Comanche Nation, Jimmy Arterberry. And on page 5, although the book predominantly looks at the marker trees in Texas, he tells on page 5 of how the Comanche learned to modify trees when they lived among the Ute. Well, that was not in East Texas. That was here in what's today Colorado. So what it forced us to do was to go back in time and try to find documentation of, well, when did the Cherokee arrive here? We know that the Ute were here, according to the Ute tradition, the creation story. They've always been here, and they may have been. It looks like the DNA research puts them here at least 10,000 years ago, right after the receding last ice age is when they claim to have been brought here by Creator at the beginning of time. Looking at this map, it's dated 1778 and was drawn by Juan Bautista, I'm saying that wrong, by Don Juan Pacheco, Miria y Pacheco. And he was an important map maker when we were all part of the Spanish frontier, the northern frontier. And this area takes in about a 4-state area. So in the lower right-hand corner is what's now New Mexico, in the upper right-hand corner, Colorado, Utah over here with the Great Salt Lakes, and then this is Arizona. So we have the Continental Divide, we have the major river crossings, the Rio Grande, what we know as the Rio Colorado, Rio Grande. And then this is the Arkansas River. So in 1778, when he drew this map, we were all located somewhere right in this area here. I don't know if you can see this in the back, there are some teepee icons around the map. The ones on the right side of the divide are labeled Comanche, which was the name given by the Ute to the Comanche people, and it means he who wants to fight me all the time. And the Comanche were very warlike. With most tribes, Cheyenne, Arapaho, you'd get together and say, oh, we're going to have a battle and we're going to fight tomorrow from about, noon until, daybreak or whatever, and sunset. But with the Comanche, whenever they saw you, the fight was on, and it was a fight to the death, and they took no quarters, no prisoners. On the left-hand side, you'll see some of these teepee icons labeled this Utahs with a Y, U-T-A-S. That was what the Spanish called the Ute people. It's not what the Ute called themselves. They called themselves the Nooch, which was their term for the people, which differentiated the two-legged from the four-legged or the winged ones. But when the Spanish got here, they renamed most of the Native American people they came in contact with, and if they couldn't translate the name, then they came up with a name for them, oftentimes from where they lived or what they ate or something that was unique to that tribe. So these icons here, there's some in the San Luis Valley. This one has 6 teepees, and here's one with 4, here's one with 4, there's one with 5. We think there must be some type of a reference scale to that. So most teepees have an average of 8 or 10 or 12 family members in that teepee. So we wondered if that was the Pacheco's way of identifying 10 people, and so if you have 5 teepees, was there 50 people in that village? It's just kind of a guess on our part, but it kind of makes sense. So you can see where they were encountered in 1778. Let me move on to this chart. How am I doing on time, by the way? It's what, about 5:30? Oh, no, it's not. It's about 2:50. Just seeing if you're awake. How are we doing, Gloria? Yeah, well, I've kind of lost track, too. Everybody okay? What I'll try to do is, go through these a little bit more quicker and stay away from. Is this okay? Okay, well, thank you. This chart was, I created that with Dr. Lois Adams, who's with the Chukara Valley Historical Society, and she's a retired professional educator, Dr. Adams. She said, John, this is great for you. You understand this, but she said, what I think would really be helpful, especially for younger people, is to have some kind of a chart that you could look at that you could identify the natural causes and the human causes. And so collaborating with her over a period of several iterations, we came up with what we call the CMT, culturally modified tree, or CMT verification chart, or V chart. And what it does is it walks you down the left side of the V to rule out the natural causes, because there's a lot of natural causes for a tree to be bent or deformed, lightning or disease or whatever. And when you get down to the bottom of the V, if you rule out those natural causes, as you start going up the right-hand side of the V, you can start getting a better indication that that tree may, in fact, be a genuine CMT. Is it old enough? Again, we need them about 140, 150 years old before they even could qualify. Is the location in some area where there's a trail or a pass? Are there other CMTs that are found in that area? Are there tie-down marks? And on the map is a picture of the tie-down marks, and I'll show you a close-up view of that here in a minute. And then the peel bark pattern, or any kind of burls or anything else that might be human caused. The peel pattern is very, very distinct. The tree, again, when it was bent, or as it's growing, if they're bending a branch or reshaping an upper part of that trunk, the most common tool that they used for the shaping, the tie downs, was yucca cordage. And excuse me. This braided yucca cordage here, excuse me, was found on an arrowhead projectile cache that was dated to be between 8 and 100 years old. It was found in a cave in eastern Utah, and it was in pristine condition, but it had never been exposed to sunlight or snow or rain or anything. So, but that cordage can last a long time, if it's protected from the weather. Magnificent collection, obsidian, different kinds of flint. Didn't come from Utah. They probably came from Texas. We think that cache came from. Anyway, when the cordage is tied around a young tree, as the tree grows, some of you may have done this. If you take baling wire or bob wire, and you put it around a tree when it's little, as the tree grows, it's going to leave that indentation in the bark. And then if you come along later and take that baling wire off, it's still going to leave an indentation in that trunk. It's usually more pronounced on the inside curve of where it's being tied down. So you can kind of look at your elbow, if you've got kind of some wrinkles in there, at least I do, and that's like the bend in the tree, and the cordage is being tied to a stake in the ground or a rock or another tree over here. That's going to create that indentation. But they didn't have 4 tie downs or 4 cordages. As the tree's growing, they would come usually the next year, the next season, and readjust the tree. They'd pray around the tree, and then the tree's going to grow a little bit more. Then they'd adjust the cordage. It's going to grow more, and then it'll grow a little bit more. And according to some of the Ute elders, they had to, by their tradition, spiritual beliefs, they had to return to that tree at least 4 times and pray around the tree, but that gave them 4 annual revisits for the modification and the adjustment of the tree. So because this one had 4 tie-down marks, we again think it's probably more attributable to the Ute, because it seems to be consistent with that practice, that tradition. So it's one of the things you want to look for on your trees. Is there evidence of the tie-down, evidence of girdling, evidence of the peel bark? What's it pointing to? Is there something of significance that it's trying to tell people about? I mentioned this one tree that had been standing dead north of Fox Run, where this developer was putting in all of these new houses, and we got consent of the tree was standing dead for some time. We'd been watching it for about 15 years, and It was going to be clear cut anyway with the developer putting in houses. So we got permission from the developer, but we also got permission of the Ute elder we'd been working with, Dr. Jefferson. And in prayer, he asked consent of the tree and creator for us to be able to remove, it's called a cookie, it's about 1.25 inches in diameter at the base of the tree, because again, the base of the tree is going to have more of the rings because it's the older part of the tree. So from the base of the tree, we were able to send this particular cookie to a dendrochronologist. She uses a stereoscopic microscope, and she's very detailed in her examination. And she always starts at the beginning, which is the pith ring, pith, P-I-T-H, that's year 0. And then each year, the tree is going to add a ring. And as you count out, let's see, can't remember how many years out. It was, I guess it would have been about 250 years in growth. We can see a fire scar that goes around the blackened area. And then the tree changes color. Notice here how it's got a really kind of a beautiful kind of a reddish red. That's a healthy tree. After the fire, we see it takes on this kind of a bluish green tinge, and you can see that it's got some other markings and deformations in there. So it's changed colors. Anybody have an idea what caused that change in the tree? It's from a Rocky Mountain pine beetle. Yeah, and you probably all have seen wood that's got that bluish green tinge. A lot of like high-end cabinetry, might have, the Rocky Mountain pine beetle. I think it's a beautiful wood. But what happens is after the fire, the tree's not able to produce the pheromones that wards off the pine beetle. And so the pine beetle, was able to penetrate, the bark and to get in there and lay the eggs, the larvae, and that leads to the death of the tree. What surprised me is I thought, after the pine beetle, infected the tree, I don't know why I thought this. I figured it'd probably be dead in, 3 to 5 years based upon zero, knowledge. But this one lasted 110 years, which is kind of a surprise. The other thing that's a surprise is the diameter. If you were to say, well, how big would a tree that's 360 years old have to be? And people, oh gosh, it must be as big as a Volkswagen. Well, this one's only 12 inches in diameter. And the point that I had to kind of retrain my mind to think about is the girth of the tree and the height is going to be much more dependent upon the soil, access to water, access to sunlight, than at the age. So you can't just say, well, that tree's too little to be 200 or 250 years old. What's that? Yes. Yeah, and we also think some of the modifications can severely stunt a tree too. Because we've seen some very small ones that we think are 200-300 years old that bear evidence of human modification. I keep losing my pointer here, but we're about to the end of the presentation, so I think it's okay. Oh, there it is. Thanks. Thank you. I put it there because I wouldn't lose my coffee cup, probably. How many of you have been on the Mountain Ute reservation south of Cortez? There's a park there. Oh yeah, Kathy has, of course. We were there together. And actually, I took this picture when we were there. This was our guide, a young archaeologist student, and what he's showing us on this a petroglyph. Sometimes it's referred to as rock art. And I made this mistake a couple times. If we refer to rock art in the presence of most Native American people, especially the elders, they'll correct you immediately because that's their job. If they don't correct you, it looks like what you said, is accurate. And so I've learned to adjust my vocabulary that this is not rock art. It's not meant to be a pretty picture. It's a story. It's a Native American story. And I think that's what a lot of the trees are actually stories. And in fact, the Comanche used the term story trees. And so what we're looking at here is a story from hundreds of years ago that was carved into the rock, the petroglyphs, by chipping the rock, what's referred to as desert varnish. That's kind of that purple reddish color there. And what we think it's the story, at least this is from our Ute guide, is that it's a story of the sunrise and the interpretation of the sun. The sun's very important with at least the Ute culture, probably many tribes. They're one of the tribes that still have a sun dance, a ceremony every year in the fall. But over this young man's shoulder is a piece of a rock that sticks out, and when the sun sets on the equinox, not the equinox, the solstice, the summer solstice on the sunset, that shadow comes across, and he's illustrating how it comes across right at the center of this artifact, and then as it continues to go down, it goes across this entire rock panel, which must be like 14 or 15 feet. It's a very long panel of petroglyphs, and each of the images has a different part of the story that it's talking about. It's almost kind of like a movie, that's playing. It's really fascinating to hear him describe that. And what we have learned more recently, and this is through the teaching of Dr. Jefferson, is that his people, his ancestors, he was always taught from the time he was a little boy, that his ancestors used the trees as a clock, a calendar, and a compass, because they didn't have, a clock, calendar, and a compass. So what we had to do was to go back with some of our trees that we didn't know what they were there for and study, do any of them have solstice, sunrise, or sunset alignments? And sure enough, some have equinox or solstice. These two trees on the left, these are in northern El Paso County, just south of Douglas County line, and they've been fused together at the top and the bottom, and yet there's still a narrow little slit. And on the sunrise of the summer solstice, June 21st, if you're standing there at sunrise, you can see that sun rise and go up that slit. It's almost like the sun dagger with the petroglyphs. Some of you are probably familiar with the sun dagger. On the right-hand side is a really fascinating tree in Fox Run. It's off of the southern entrance, the main entrance, off of Stella Drive near Pavilion 5, Kevin, if you want to go there. But it's probably about 12, 14 feet in the air, and it makes this really unique kind of a window, kind of a frame. And it had to have been purposely modified, because trees can't grow that on their own. They can't make a square. They just don't do that. So somebody has fused that. You can see the tie-down marks, and we studied that to see if there was some kind of something on the horizon, a sunrise, a moonrise, if there was some constellation in the stars, and we couldn't figure it out. And we'd been there probably 12, 14 times at different times of the day trying to study it. And Dr. Jefferson finally told us, so there was something there that he was familiar with that he wasn't comfortable sharing. And the only thing he would do is he looked at me when I showed him the pictures, and he said, study the shadows, study the shadows. And he turned and walked away. And so I thought, okay, there's something there. So we went back, and sure enough, that tree, that's the shadow on that tree in the morning, the shadows, are real long. And here in the northern hemisphere, as the sun goes across the sky, that shadow, it's like a sundial. It's going to track across, to the north, but it also gets shorter, and that's kind of fascinating. And at the shortest length, it's pointing precisely at true north, to the North Star, and that's the star that the Ute navigated by. So again, we think this is oriented to the Ute. And then as the sun continues across the sky, the shadow is going to get longer and longer until it's really spread out. But here's the unique thing. When the sun first comes up, you can't see that shadow opening. It's not until about mid-morning when you start to see on the shadow that opening starting to appear. And then it gets full at precisely midday, noon, which is your north direction, and then it begins to close. It's a magnificent thing that they used, again, for a compass as well as for a clock, knowing what time a day it is. This is about 12, 14 feet to that first bend. So you're probably like me, you had to be standing on a scaffolding or maybe on your horse, I don't know, but it's quite a ways off of the ground. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they had to get at that height and make that trunk separate, part of it going straight out while the other part's going. They had to return multiple times, and then they had to, bind it back together again. Yeah, they had to tie it off. I kind of wondered if they created kind of because the Utes were masters at this, creating rabbit traps, eagle snares, where they could make, a box structure. I kind of wonder if they created some kind of like a two-dimensional box structure, that I think you got it. And how long would that take to get this tree, to grow back together like that? And where do you learn that? That's the fascinating thing, especially with a language that had no written language. So it had been passed down from one generation to the next to the next. And one of the neat things about the Ute people is they respected the women extensively, the mothers, Mother Earth, and the grandmothers. To in fact, they're one of the tribes that the medicine men are oftentimes medicine women. And so they're very open-minded to that, where many tribes, oh no, you're a woman, you can't be a medicine man, you couldn't possibly handle that. But the Ute said, oh wait a minute, some of our best medicine people, are women, and they also knew how to modify trees. This is my second to the last slide, and it's the one I've been wanting to share with the geologists here. If you read some of the archaeological publications, they'll say there's been no medicine wheel found south of the Wyoming border. Well, here's one, and it's in Colorado, just in Jefferson County, just west of downtown Denver, and it is magnificent. I don't know how many stones there are, but every one of them is a milk white quartz crystal. And that center stone is huge. It's probably, 3.5, 4 feet off the ground, and I don't know how far into the ground it goes. It is just solid as a rock, pardon the pun. But you can't move it. So it must be in the ground a good, another foot, maybe 2 feet. And then all the way around that stone feature are these other rocks, and they've been very purposefully set. There's 4 spokes radiating out from the center, and they're aligned perfectly true north, south, east, west. There are energy line alignments with this stone. One of the things we always teach when we go out to these places is please don't pick up a rock and examine it, even if you put it back in the same place. We try to encourage the thought of take only pictures, leave only footprints. And part of the reason we do that is to preserve the archaeological record. Dr. Gary Ziegler, he's the gentleman on the left in the green shirt. He is one of the co-owners of the Bear Basin Ranch here in Custer County, West Cliff. Some of you may know Gary and Amy Ziegler. Fascinating geologist, archaeologist. He's written a book on the Machu Picchu twin sisters. He's led 29 expeditions to Peru, to Machu Picchu. We're trying to join Gary next year. He's rewriting his book. We're hoping its launch is in Peru next year, so we're going to try to join him. But the point I want to get 2 points before I go to my next slide is to the Ute, rocks are sacred too. And the 3 most sacred rocks are the milk white quartz crystal, the amsonite, which is the little blue stone that's found throughout Colorado, and the smoky quartz crystal. Sometimes we have found, a smoky quartz or an amsonite associated with a prayer tree, and we always leave that in place. We encourage that the rocks are not moved, primarily to protect the lichen ridging. So our geologists are probably familiar with this term. It was a new term to me. And lichen is this greenish, it looks like moss, that's growing on the rocks. Sometimes it'll grow on the trees too. And the difference between moss and lichen is moss, has a root system. Lichen does not. It needs a host. It needs a tree or a rock to grow on. And when it grows from one rock onto the next rock, and this takes years to do, decades. When that moss grows from this rock onto this one, it forms a little bridge. And it's kind of like a tree ring. It grows from the center, and it leaves a little ring and a little ring and a little ring. So 75, 80 years, it might grow from this rock onto this rock, leaving this little bridge. But if you have somebody that comes along unknowingly and they pick up one of those rocks, they've just broken the archaeological record. They fractured that lichen bridge. So we always try to encourage people, especially when you have young people with you, pass that on, that knowledge. It's important. And we always try to pass along, Native American traditions, such as with the elders, they always taught their children, if you want to pick a flower, a wild rose, and you want to give that to your mother or your grandmother, of a sign of respect and love, that's okay. But you can't pick the first one, you can't pick the second one, you can't pick the third one, you can't pick the fourth one. But if you find the fifth rose, you can pick that and you can give that to them. Now, why would they not allow them to pick the first 4 flowers? Yeah, it's for sustainability, right? Yeah, they figure, if that first one's picked, there might not, who knows, it may be endangered. But if you've got 4 in that area, and you now, go to the 5th one, those are important lessons today. So the point I want to leave with is we probably today have much more to learn from the Native American people than they'll ever have to learn from us. So thank you for the chance to be here with you today. I want to, if it's okay, before it's okay, can I take 2 minutes? Because I get these questions in the back and with the books. I have 7 books that I've published. They're all available on Barnes & Noble online or Amazon. And we were talking about the one on the right on the Native American prairie trees of Colorado. The first book is on the Ute Indian prairie trees of the Pikes Peak Ridge. And again, the difference is the second one has a broader area and it talks more about some of the other tribes. But if you're interested more like the Pikes Peak region, you'll like that one. And I have both of them here today. Anybody else a Sherlock Holmes fan? I'm just, a fanatic. And you may recognize the title, Little London is what Colorado Springs was known as. That was a nickname for Colorado Springs during the Victorian era. So I have Dr. Watson and Sherlock coming to Little London in 1896, which is the one gap year in the series. And then Zach Box is my first science fiction novel, and it's a 15-and-a-half-year-old half-Ute boy who grows up in the Colorado Springs area today, wanting to attend the Air Force Academy. And so the difference in this one is instead of finding a flying saucer, the flying saucer finds him, and they have to return to the Pleiades. The Pleiades, according to the Ute tradition, is where the Creator brought the Ute people here to the Shining Mountains at the beginning of time from the Pleiades. So the storyline is Zach needs to return to the Pleiades. And then Rankin Scott Kelly was the first sheriff of El Paso County. I was the 26th sheriff. And so I have a nonfiction on him. And it was such a fascinating character. He was involved in forced shootouts with outlaws. And I had his horse shot out from him twice. When I think back to my 8 years, I had a pretty severe paper cut in my first term. Well, those can really bleed, and they sting. They hurt. Yeah. But he was the real thing. And one of the things I was disappointed about was what little had been written about him. I'd find a little snippet in a newspaper column or something about him. And so I kind of took some liberties and turned his real life story into a historical fiction. And one of the things that was missing in his life, he lived to be 87, is we knew that he had a love interest, and he was interviewed a few months before he passed away. And he was asked, well, how come this newspaper reporter knew and had studied a lot about him? And she said, you had a reputation, this is when he was 87, when you were a young man, you were very popular with the ladies. He was very tall and slender and had piercing blue eyes, and kind of like all of us sheriffs, since then. But anyway, so she said, well, how is it that you've never married? He was known to be a natural on the ballroom floor and things like that. And he said, the woman I love married someone else. And that just break your heart. So we don't know who that is. In 87 years, he never said who that was. So I created a love interest in my novel. And I've written co-authored a screenplay. So if any of you are related to Clint Eastwood or some movie producer, let me know. And so there's 2 books on Sheriff Kelly. One's a fiction, one's nonfiction. I'm very happy to sign them for you, or with the holiday season, if you're going to buy one as a gift, I'm happy to sign it, for your loved one who we're going to give the gift to. Is it okay to take just a couple of questions? I know I went over a few minutes.
Of course, I just was going to announce that we have a tradition of passing the hat to help with some of our expenses, so that's what's going
Great.
Please take
Thank you.
questions. I'm going to give you your
Oh,
honorarium,
thank you. Great.
right now.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you. That's really very much appreciated. Does anybody have any questions we want to share for the group? Oh, I like good ones. Yes, Mark.
Actually, it's not a question. I just wanted to give a little side note to something with regard to talking about the spirits and the spirits and the trees and things like that, and that the Indians believe spirits are in everything.
Yeah.
So they have sacred sites. And as an engineer, this is really hard for me because this can't happen. And then I watch it happen over and over and over again. So there are spirits that protect these sites. And if you go to these sites, a lot of times you can't get any information from them because the spirit will not let you. And as an example, everyone has a phone.
Yeah.
Everyone has a GPS receiver in this phone, and everyone's GPS tells you exactly where you are at any given time within 5 feet. And we will go to a sacred site and not ask permission, forget something like that, take a GPS receiver and mark that spot, go back home, go back to Google Earth, and it's 2 miles over there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go back and measure again, and it's a mile and a half over there.
Yeah.
Go
Yeah.
back again, this actually happened back in October here. So we went back again with the youth elder, went to the sacred site, did a prayer, asked for forgiveness, asked, could we please have information, did a sage ceremony, took the GPS, measured the GPS, went back and went on that spot.
Yeah. It does sound bizarre, but I've had that same experience. And, and another unique experience I've had with Dr. Jefferson is walking through the forest, and he'll get real quiet, and he'll start looking over his shoulder, and he'll whisper, he'll say, they're here with us. I said, ooh, are they mad? No, but you know, they're watching, and if you're treating something respectfully, then, you know, things could be revealed to you, or if you're not. I think there's something to that. So I'm not trying to convince you, but I am trying to say, you know, to some people, you know, that modify this is very sacred. Yes.
You talked about the trees being prayer trees and
Yes.
also burial trees.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
Do they mark a burial site, or how are they used as a
Yeah,
burial?
we have seen several that are pointed towards where there are some burials, and more than one. And traditionally speaking, we think there are 5 generally accepted types of trees. The burial tree, the trail marker is one of the 30-degree angle of inclination. It's more common. There's also a story tree and a medicine tree, and then the 5th type that's widely accepted. It's called an arbor glyph. It's kind of like a petroglyph, only carving in the bark of the tree. But I have to share this, and that's one of the differences with my first book and my second book, is I spent a lot of time being, you know, kind of educated, you know, like a lot of us, you know, kind of that Western side, where, you know, to understand something, I want to compartmentalize it. You know, I need an org chart, you know, it's a CMT, and then, you know, where are they, and then how many different classifications. And so generally speaking, a non-native person like me falls into that trap of, you know, putting things in that category. So the burial tree is the second most common type, and we do think there are burials associated with it. But I have to correct myself in the second book. And most of the Native American people, they don't care that it's, you know, what it's called. They just have an intimate connection to that tree, and that tree is unique. So they do, in many cases, believe that there's a loved one or one's buried along that tree, along that orientation. And sometimes there's energy lines aligned with that burial tree. Yes, sir. Somebody had a question. Yes, sir.
Are we aware of any, speaking of the trees, are we aware of any new ones being made?
I was just going to ask the same. When the youths located, did they attempt to do it?
Well, I can answer that with the Ute, and I don't know of any tribe who's doing this today, but when the Ute were forced on one of the 3 reservations, you know, that was one way they knew they weren't coming back. And as near as we can tell, every tree that we found predates the Ute removal from Colorado. And what in the conversations I had with some of the elders, they said, you know, when my people got to the reservation, they knew they weren't going anywhere, so why do they need a trail marker tree? So it looks like that was a tradition that had died off with at least the Ute, and I think with most all the tribes. Yeah, yeah, and I think once they got there, of course in Oklahoma, you're not going to have near as many of the trees, but I saw a hand back here. Yes, ma'am. Hi.
Are there any in this immediate area?
Beulah has a couple of nice examples. Again, we lost the best example, but there's along the northern area in Beulah. I think the best collection is, if you wanted to go out and look at some, you know, that's easily accessible, is in El Paso County, in Fox Run Regional Park. And in my first book, I have kind of a walking tour, you know, where you can park off this trailhead. It's called Roller Coaster Road Trailhead. And you can follow the trail kind of in a counterclockwise, and I have pictures of some of the different trees and give you kind of an idea, you know, how many meters or, you know, feet, you know, you walk, and then the tree will be on your left or your right. So if you're wanting to go see some, that's probably the best area. Fremont County, probably in western part, we know the Ute were here extensively. And in my history book, A to Z, Colorado's Nearly Forgotten History, 1776 to 1876, I document some of the firsthand accounts of, like with the Fremont expedition. Some of you are probably familiar with this. You know, they had witnessed, you know, a battle with the Ute in, I think, the Cheyenne, were the opposing forces. So we have firsthand accounts of the Ute being here, but I don't know of a lot of CMTs in Fremont County, but I do know in Custer County, Westcliff area. On the back of my second prayer tree book is a magnificent medicine tree, and it's there right next to a stone feature. Teller County, Jefferson County, Douglas County, El Paso County. So you kind of have to get a little ways out of Fremont County to really find, you know, a heavy concentration of them. Yes.
So, by mistake, I don't know. My property in Cotopaxi and my neighbor's property in Cotopaxi, we have 10 trees on that property, including 2 solstice equinox trees and multiple burial trees. It seems to have been a hot spot.
Yeah.
Are we near the basin, or what is it called, Great Basin? Are you on the?
As you go up Copper Gulch Road,
Yeah.
just before Road 1, it's when you get, when you're going up Copper Gulch Road and you get to the Glen Vista neighborhood and houses start, just as you get to that point, there is a mountain, a small mountain, right there. It happens to be one of the only mountains that faces due south. I own most of that mountain, and the top of the mountain has a direct view at Mount Blanca, which is also sacred to the Indians. And then there's a valley on the other side of that, other side of the hill. And in that valley, we think that there was 150 Indians in there.
Yeah.
You can, it's not my property, the lower part's not my property. The person who owns it hasn't been there since the 80s, so.
That might be a follow-up that Fremont County Historical Society wants to do, is organize a trip, you know, somewhere. Because that's, you know, looking at them on slides and all that, you know, it's a good way, or reading a book or watching a video. But I tell you, there's nothing that surpasses actually going and touching the tree and its location and experiencing it. So I'd encourage you to think about doing that. If there are any other questions, I'll be in the back. But let me go ahead and just thank you again, and Dan and Kathy and Gloria for the privilege of being here, and thank all of you. And your goal, if you'll accept it, is to go out and tell 10 people. Maybe they'll tell 10 people, and these trees will live on. Thank you. Have a good rest of your Sunday.